It's gone from, why bother caring about it, to like, yeah, well, we're all gonna die.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of No Books on a Dead Planet. I am somebody who's incredibly terrified about the ending of the world, but can't actually intellectually engage with it on any level because it scares me too much. But I love books so much that when I think about the fact that books might not exist on the planet, somehow that gets into my brain. So I have this series where I'm inviting a guest on every episode to read with me a book that you might be scared to read about the climate crisis and have a conversation that you might be scared to have about the climate crisis. So this is here. If you're lazy, you are welcome here. We're going to read the book for you, have the conversation for you in the hopes that you might pick up the book, have the conversation, or at least come away with some of the learning points from the book that we're going to read. Today, I'm really, really excited because we have a guest on that I have watched for years. Levi is here. He is of the channel Levi and Leah, and also Future Proof. Hello, Levi.
Aw, Leena, thanks for having me.
Fangirling over here.
A fellow long-time watcher, so thanks for having me.
There we go.
I'm excited.
The worlds converge. So Levi is on the other side of the planet-ish. Well, I don't know. I've kind of a third across the planet, maybe.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for getting up so early, Levi. Can you tell us just, if somebody hasn't seen your channel before, rude. But if they haven't, can you just tell us like a little whistle-stop tour of what you do and what you do existing? I don't know. What is your existence like?
That's what is my existence? My goodness, starting off light.
Yeah.
No, so my wife Leah and I have a channel called Levi and Leah where we basically capture our lifestyle and what we do in our life on a day-to-day basis, but also through the lens of sustainability, how we, live a sustainable lifestyle is still awesome, so we're not like living under a rock and, making our own milk with a, poundy piece of wood thingy like it's back in whatever 1800s or something. And then I launched Future Proof back in November, which is sort of an explainer channel where we talk about different brands and companies that are trying to make the world a better place, or the ones that are not also.
Sometimes the bad ones.
Yeah.
No, I love it. And I think what I really like about your and Leah's kind of way of living, I think lifestyle's like lifestyle. It's just exactly. You make it look like not easy, but fun and doable. Like you don't make it like intimidating or anything. And like you said, you're not like cleaning your teeth with sticks and going proper back to basics. It still looks like a recognisable life. So it's really, really cool. Before we chat about the book that we're going to chat about today, I wanted to just ask you a little bit about how you find, because obviously you talk about the environment and the big CC, the climate crisis, all the time on the internet, but in your real life, not that there is really, I mean, what is the differentiation? But in your life off screen, how do you find like having conversations about the climate crisis, and do you find them hard? Have you found them easier over the years, or how does that go for you?
Well, it's changed a little bit from something that people were sort of skeptical about or like maybe hesitant to get into to now something that's sort of accepted as sort of like an apathetic end of days scenario that is inevitably going to come. Like now even people who don't care about climate change acknowledge that it exists because we're probably all going to die in a fiery inferno or under, seawater rise or something. Like it's gone from, why bother caring about it, to like, yeah, well, we're all going to die. So it's like...
No more cheerful.
Yeah, it's not better from like a psychological standpoint, but at least we're not denying it anymore.
Yeah, there's at least an opportunity to crank open the tin and be like, maybe we can talk about it a little bit.
Yeah.
No, I think you're right. I think a lot of my kind of conversations have changed just because the environment around us has changed, and like the media environment, it has actually become a little bit more normal to talk about it. And when I gave up meat, I thought everybody would have loads of questions about it, and nobody had any questions for me. Which I was like, excuse me, I have a lot of answers prepared about why I've given up meat, but it was more normal. Nobody was interested. So.
Which is a good thing, hopefully, that's...
Exactly. I was hoping for some kudos or to be like the radical, but no.
Exactly.
As usual, I'm doing something incredibly normal and boring. On to The book that we chose today, Braiding Sweetgrass, is one book that I have heard quite a lot about and have never picked up for no particular reason. But when we were chatting about you coming on the series, you picked this book from my suggested list. Can you tell me why and if you'd heard about it before?
I had heard about it from almost every member of my family. Oh, wow. This is I come from a family of readers. So my mom and my uncle and my grandmother and my grandfather and my dad and all that side of my family is really into reading, and not like lowbrow smut. Like they're into like real like Canada Reads, high level intellectual books about, like current events and like, immigrant stories and things that like, really force you to think a little bit. And so this was one on that list, and I was like, I don't want to go there. that sounds like a lot of work. And so this was like a challenge for me. I was like, all right, I know that this is one that I should read. It's been on the list for a while. Let's get into it.
Nothing more inspiring than a deadline.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly.
Sadly,
that's
yes.
my muse. My muse is a deadline. Well, yeah, I think also because Robin, who wrote the book, is like an academic and a professor. That definitely comes through in the writing, so I can understand why it's a bit like, oh God, you should have wished your family were into bodice rippers and stuff, and they'd be recommending you fun stuff. But
yeah.
But at least now, when you see them, you can be like, I've actually read it. I have notes.
Yeah, I will have regained some status amongst the family.
Did you have any preconceptions about what the book might be like, apart from the fact that it might be a bit hard? Because I think for me, like, I kind of thought it would be more of a kind of manifesto, and I felt for the first kind of half it was more of like a musing. Do you know what I mean? She was kind of musing on what she was experiencing and what she believed, but it did definitely go a bit manifesto at the end, so I enjoyed that. But was there any misconceptions you had about it and you're surprised by?
I thought it was going to be far less readable. I thought it was going to be far more jargonous and doomsday kind of epic in the sort of language that I have heard a lot of these books take place. She actually did a remarkable job of weaving in some humanity that wasn't depressing and making a compelling story that I found interesting throughout the information that is so necessary.
Yeah, definitely. The subtitle I forgot to say is Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge and the Teaching of Plants. And I think you're right. I think she kind of takes you along, like models her life. She's like, I live alongside plants and this is how my day goes. And this is how I've cleared a pond. And this is, so I think it's kind of like your channel, I guess. It's like bringing people along and being like, this is what I'm doing. And making it not so intimidating. I realised as well, like something that I wasn't expecting was the listing on my copy, like in the Dewey Decimal System, is botany, and I honestly don't think I've ever read a book that was in the botany section. And I was like, I think that's why, like, there was parts of it that I was like, I've never read a book like this before, but that's probably because it's about the science of plants, and that's not something I've really foraged into, as it were.
She made a good point in there, because she kind of reflects on her role as an ecologist, as I guess she's an ecologist, not a biologist. Those are different things. But that specific focus on plants, and like she talks about her indoctrination into like Western medicine and how that really shaped her worldview, and how she had to like unlearn that side of this conversation to kind of like relearn her traditional knowledge, and like trying to merge those two and the difficulties between that. That's where I found it got interesting. Like, because honestly for me, when she started like talking about the different kinds of plants and stuff, I was like, okay, like am I gonna like go and Google every single one of these plants to see what they look like, to understand like what it might look like in my brain to imagine these things? And that's I think what so many people get wrong with climate change related books, is that they get far too concerned about the literal statistics or the facts or the truth. There's so much that needs to be said, it feels like. There's so much terrible stuff, and if only people knew. But the thing is that we all know. the thing is we need to invoke people's emotions and get them to feel like they can act. And I felt like she charted her journey to action well enough and in an interesting way that, maybe more people will act once they read this book.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also, like, there was a part when I was making notes about what I might say, like, there was part of me was like, oh, some of these descriptions, especially of the plants, I was like, bit long. Of it, like, not really. I am a plant person in practice, I guess. I'm going to have to be. But I'm not really, like, my housemate at uni did a dissertation on soil, and I can't say that I've ever connected with a person less on that level. Like, there's so much about it that I was like, I don't. And again, like, I think I would have benefited. I'd love for this to come out in an illustrated edition. Like, if they had a picture, like, she's got really great, like visceral descriptions of them. But because like, the, Americas aren't my native land. There's no way I would have ever seen these plants before, so that would have been useful. But it was funny because I was thinking, like, oh, some parts of this are quite long. Like, there's a whole chapter where she just, like, talks about how she clears her pond. And she really cares about clearing her pond. But then she kind of called me out on page 110 because she talks about this part where she's doing the Thanksgiving address, and she does it with, like, business people and people from the government, and they kind of comment on, like, how long it is and, like, how it's like, why are they describing everything they're grateful for in this address? Like, can we just get on with the meeting? And she said, poor you, I sympathize. What a pity that we have so much to be thankful for. And I was like,
boom.
I was like, I have been owned by you, Robin, because I think maybe I'm just a millennial and I've got a short attention span, but I was getting a bit like, oh, I don't want to hear about every species in your pond. But she's thankful for it, and I have been indoctrinated into a Western way of thinking where I just switch off. So yeah, I thought that was quite funny. I had a little laugh because I was like, oh, she's talking to me.
She does have a very good way of illustrating those kinds of relationships and that dichotomy between the two polarized cultures that she occupies. It's fantastic, especially as somebody who kind of grew up in Canada, where we have a lot of Indigenous culture and a lot of Indigenous resurgence that's happening right now. You see the two butting heads quite often, and she captured that beautifully.
Yeah. I mean, on that note, actually, I was going to ask you. So I was trying to think of, like, in my 20s and my 30s, I definitely, like, engaged more with, like, understanding, like, the Indigenous culture, particularly in America. Or the Americas, I don't know how to say that without being, because I know that people from Canada hate saying, like, when I say American, I mean USA, which is bad, but, like, the American, anyway. That's my own path to walk, to work out.
There you go.
Where, I was thinking about, like, in my childhood, any time that I had interacted with any media that discussed, like, Native American stuff, and it was only this really awful film, I don't know if you've seen it, called Indian in the Cupboard.
Yes, yeah.
Pretty bad. Pocahontas, and then also whenever I went on a trip to Cadbury's World, which is a chocolate factory that I used to go on as a kid, that you get, like, school trips, and they have, like, a whole section where they explain, like, the origins of cocoa, and they have, like, full-grown like wax models of Native Americans, like, handing you cocoa beans. It's incredibly creepy. So
that's amazing.
As somebody who grew up in Britain, like, it's not something that we learn about at all in the school system. So I'd love to hear, like, what you learned growing up about it, and if that's kind of changed and stuff.
Well, we didn't learn a lot.
Okay.
So I'm a part of a generation that lived pre and post internet, and I'm part of a generation that lived pre and post Indigenous, really. My community where I grew up was a rural, small town in the more northern part of the province that we live in, and to this day, the local Indigenous people are referred to as Indians, and they live on an Indian reservation. And there's still a lot of pretty blatant racism towards them. And it was just, like, a completely undiscussed part of my childhood. It wasn't, like, we gave them rides. There was members of our community that we knew personally, that we talked with and hung out with. There was never a discussion of, like, Tom is Indigenous. There was never like it was not a thing we talked about. And those there, but the segregation was really real. There was an Indian in quotation marks side of the school, so only the Indigenous kids would be on that side of the school, and all the white kids would be on the other side.
What? But
Yeah.
Did you learn different things?
No. Well, yeah, actually, in some ways, it wasn't formal segregation. It
Wow.
was
I didn't
just like
know.
social segregation. So they just kind of found themselves in that corner, probably because of racism and social exclusion and the way that our system was set up. And like I'm reflecting on this as I speak to you, and I'm like, yeah, that was kind of crazy. Like,
Wild.
how did that even happen? And then I went to university, and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission released findings and discussed the realities of residential schools in Canada, which was sort of like a cultural genocide that happened, sadly, not that long ago. And this was basically like taking kids and Indigenous people off the land and then basically taking the Indian out of the boy, or whatever that famous quote is. And that was the first time I heard about it when I was in university.
Wow.
In the country that
About
it
the same
happened
time as
in.
me, then.
Exactly. And I think that just goes to show how incredibly pervasive and well done that genocide was. Like the fact that people who lived and were born just shortly after the last residential school closed in this country had literally no idea that happened or that it was important. And actually, one thing I wanted to do when we started this is a land acknowledgement, which is something
yes.
that
Please.
I'm trying to do more, and that I'm not totally comfortable with, but I think it's important to try. So where I am right now, I'm on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen, the Wasanich, the Esquimalt, and the Songhees Nation. These are a sort of patchwork of different ancestral tribes that have lived in this area for millennia. And this is where our university is. This is where our parliament is. This is where I live, and it's where a lot of my friends live. And all of these communities were once what made this place up, and now we are all settlers here, and we benefit greatly from this privilege. So I am thankful every day for the place that I live, and I acknowledge that one day, a while ago, was not ours, and we took it. And so, feeling appreciative.
Has that become more of a like kind of normal thing for people to start doing? Because I've got a few emails from Canadian publishers actually who it's like it's in their footnotes of their emails and stuff. Is that something that's more recent that's come into?
Yeah, it's becoming in certain parts. So Canada is extremely large, and the varying political spectrum is as large. So we are on the West Coast, which is far more liberal leaning and has a much more vibrant and frankly economically powerful Indigenous community here. So we, like, the university has an official statement and has like mandated curriculum that every single class at UVic has to incorporate some sort of acknowledgement of Indigenous ancestry. And so like half of my classes in geography were, if not entirely focused, majoritively focused on the realities of residential schools and the histories that occupied this land before we were here. So there is a lot of emphasis where we live. You go over the Rocky Mountains into the prairies, and the acknowledgement is not quite so robust. So there's
bit of time travel over the Rockies into the 40s.
Yeah, there is varying levels of sort of interest in this as a topic, as a point of conversation, and as a way moving forward for us, I think. And reading this book was very interesting because it's set in the U.S. where they are like way behind Canada in terms of acknowledging that, you know, these are people who lived here for a long time and actually know what they're talking about. So it's interesting to read her reflections, because in some ways I'm like, yeah, we know, don't we know? Do we know this?
Do we know?
I thought we knew this. Like, we've been talking about this for like 10 years now. Like, is this not what we're all on the same page? No? Okay. All right. Write the book.
Definitely. Well, that's the thing, I guess, like, if your whole family are recommending this, like, you're on the, you know, they're the people that obviously kind of understand it a little bit more, and it's something that, I mean, when you're saying that, it kind of reminds me of, like, in the UK, I'm from a city called Coventry, which is the most bombed city apart from London when the World War II happened. So we had a partner German school. We had to learn German from a young age. Like, we had like all of this like reverse indoctrination to be like, German people are nice was basically the whole premise of it. So it reminds me of that a little bit. So in my very nerdy bookish book club kind of way, I set us some little tasks, and one of them was to pick a quote or a point that stood out to you. Do you want to go first, or shall I? I feel like I'm reading, like, sharing some kind of Bible thing where I'm like, Levi, would you like to share with the class your reflections on John, verse 2, chapter 8?
Here are my insights. Let me bestow my knowledge upon you.
Me.
My opinion as a white man is very valuable.
That's going in the excerpt, just that sentence.
Exactly. Why don't you go first?
Okay, so on page 29, apparently there was something that it was very early on in the book. Oh yeah, so this was really interesting. So she's talking about marketplaces and this idea. She had this dream about this market where you didn't pay for anything, but because you didn't pay for anything, you weren't that tempted to take things. And this idea of when something is cheap, you want a lot of it. So she said, had all the things in the market merely been a very low price, I probably would have scooped up as much as I could. But then when everything becomes a gift, I felt that self-restraint. And I think that's something that I really identify with, like the difference between me going into somewhere where everything's on bulk sale versus me at like maybe Christmas dinner and there's like 4 roast potatoes left and I'm like, oh no, I couldn't, you have some. And you because you look eye to eye with the people that you're sharing with, you're much more likely to be like, oh no, I actually don't need it, it's fine, you know, where versus like the kind of greedy side of it.
That was one of my favorites too. I actually had that on here.
Oh really? Great minds. And then also this idea on page 116 about patriotism and how there is a kind of, she says, she's talking about the Pledge of Allegiance versus the Thanksgiving address. And she says, I love my country too and its hopes for freedom and justice, but the boundaries of what I honour are bigger than the Republic. Let us pledge reciprocity with the living world. What if what we want for our people is patriotism? Then let us inspire true love of the country by invoking the land herself. So I like that idea that I feel like sometimes discussions of patriotism divide the left and the right, and like right-wing people tend to be patriotic and left-wing people don't as much, or at least more suspicious of that as a concept. Whereas she's kind of hoping in the future to reconcile that and be like, to be patriotic is to care about the land. Like it can be, and those kind of like overlaps give me a bit of hope, because sometimes I feel like the way people think feels so far apart. Just like, I mean, sounds like you've got a physical divide of the mountains in Canada. Like I quite like that as like a visual thing, but like that divide between like the people who are patriotic and the people who aren't, I feel like maybe me trying to reframe stuff as like me caring about the environment as a patriotic act, as something that isn't a contradiction to what the other people who I'm mainly against their beliefs are trying to do, you know?
I like this section because it's something we learned about in my geography degree, which is called the tragedy of the commons. It's a very well-known concept. Basically, it's all of the free things that we have in the world, which is like the air, the water, the trees, the rocks, and the fish in the ocean. All of these things are the commons, and they're common because everybody has access to them, and therefore they are technically free. But the problem with the tragedy of the commons is that there is no incentive to not take as much as you possibly can. Because if you don't take the fish that is there, somebody else will just take the fish. So, you know, there's this kind of very destructive loop that happens with so much of the modern capitalist economy that just kind of drives people to want and have and possess as much as they possibly can. And this was like an articulation of that, as you said, that kind of like undercut it as like, maybe we can all think about these things, but think about them in just like a slightly different way to make it positive overall. And this is what I think about a lot when I hear about a lot of Christian and other religious communities that have taken environmental points of view with their religion. So they now interpret God's word or whatever religion they're a part of as calling them to preserve and love and cherish the beautiful world that they are a part of. And their acts of service to that God are actually to clean up a marsh or advocate for, some kind of environmental preservation. And that, I think, is kind of how we get out of this. If we do, it's not going to be like, okay, let's all just stop eating Cheetos. It has to be something more romantic than that and something more wholehearted and visceral, which I think Indigenous cultures have a pretty good tap into.
Yeah, it's got to be fun. It can't be like, no fun allowed, no Cheetos for you. Like, it's got
Yeah.
you got to give somebody like something else to replace the Cheetos with.
Exactly, and I think we all long for that thing. What's the opposite of a Cheeto if not a spiritual connection to the land?
Totally.
we all want meaning, we all want significance, we all want to feel like we are a part of something bigger than ourselves. That's why we all are drawn to religion. And I think what she says in this book so often is that like the bigger thing is the planet. The bigger thing is the natural world, and you're all just not listening. It's there. If you want it, it's there. You just have to acknowledge that it's there and recognize it for the beauty that it is.
Yeah, totally. And I think as well, like when you've been speaking, it's true that I think that in a lot of religions and cultures, this kind of idea of sharing resurfaces all the time throughout history. Like, we do keep returning to it. It's not this weird concept that we've never achieved before. And I think, fun fact, my parents are Christian, and they lived under common purse for like a long, long time, even up until when I was like 5, which common purse, if you're not in like Christian circles, means that you either give away all of your income to the church and then you just get given what you need, or you work for free and then the church provide a house for you and stuff. And that's like something that within my lifetime, like that's how I grew up in the beginning. Makes it sound like I wasn't in a cult. It needs to be clear. Wasn't quite a cult. But that kind of idea of common purse and sharing is something that you can come across in loads of different ways. And I remember like when I was growing up, like I remember seeing my mum reading like the water bill, and I was like, sorry, excuse me, do we have to pay for water? And I remember being really like indignant that we had to pay for water, because I didn't think that would, I just thought you could turn on the tap. And I remember talking to my mum being like, but if we don't have water, we'll die. And she's like, yes. And I'm like, so we have to pay for it? And she's like, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I was like,
and that's capitalism.
And that was the beginning of the end of optimistic Leena.
That is interesting. Yeah. So this religious shared purse, is that what it's called?
Common purse.
Common purse.
There's people use different terms for it, but just means sharing.
It's essentially the same idea though. Like it's perhaps a slightly less sophisticated, less environmentally focused version of what she talks about this. Like she has this line, she says, in Western thinking, private land is understood to be a bundle of rights, whereas in a gift economy, property is a bundle of responsibilities. And I think that what you described is like, okay, the difference is, hey, I'm doing my thing. This is my thing, and I get to do what I want to do with it because I pay for it. Versus like, hey, we're all doing this thing. Let's just make sure that it's good for our kids down the road. That responsibility.
That extends to like intellectual property as well. Because if you've got intellectual property, what's your responsibility once you have those facts? Like the guy who didn't patent penicillin because he was like, seems that humans need penicillin, so I'm not going to patent it. So yeah, it's so interesting. I also set us to have a factoid. Do you have a factoid at all? There was actually, I think there's less emphasis on on quotable numbers rather than facts in the book.
Which so I loved. Yeah. I think quotable numbers are exhausting. And I have found that when you're arguing with your in-laws or old high school friends, facts never win arguments. There's never been a moment where somebody says, but you know what? The particulate matter in the ozone layer is now 350 parts per million. And they were like,
You're like, cool.
got it. I'm on board now. We're gonna fight climate change. But it's those emotional, personal things that are what bring people together. It's those connections of like, well, why are you scared? What about this makes you angry? What are these kind of fundamental core feelings that you have, and why are those things coming up? That's the stuff that makes people change or think even.
Totally. And also the kind of just thing of like, what would it take for you to believe it? Like, what fact do you need to hear?
Yeah.
You know,
are
like,
there any?
Are there any? Is there
Yeah.
a graph? Well, yeah, but there's no graphs in this book. We can, you know, reassure you of that.
Not a graph, but a concept that I enjoyed tremendously because I feel like it articulated something juicy. Is the Wendigo concept, the Wendigo monster, which is
Yes.
it's this mythological monster of some sort that embodies greed, essentially. And this is sort of a tale. Maybe it sounds condescending to call it a tale, but it's a story that is shared within the communities that she's a part of that eats everything and consumes far more than it needs to. And it's in her collective culture, in her communal space, the person who eats the most is banished, essentially, or they're punished in a variety of ways. And she talks about how, you know, there's stories of people hunting down the Wendigo monster to try and get rid of it. And this was like this terrible thing. Like, if you were greedy and you consumed a whole bunch, you were like the epitome of the worst. But in Western consumer culture, the Wendigo greed monster is the most celebrated form of humanity.
And it's like we're taught to not be scared of that, whereas they're like, what's the scariest thing you could be? And it's like, insatiably hungry.
All the time. Yeah, it's when she pointed that out, it was like, oh man, this is just such a huge detraction from what we're supposed to be doing, which is, you know, like communing, you know, supporting each other and celebrating what we all have. And we've just collectively as a culture devolved into greed. Just greed is like the sole purpose of our collective existence, it seems, at this point. And as she says, she's like, well, we will be punished. The earth will eventually, you know, rebalance itself, but it just won't have humans in it.
Yeah.
You know?
Which is kind of uplifting and scary at the same time. It's like when we say like we're saving the planet, I'm like, well, we're actually kind of saving ourselves. Which,
yeah, exactly.
if we are motivated by selfish means it should be even more possible. I feel like both ways prove it. I'm like, if we're inherently selfish beings, then we've got this.
Yeah, we've got it.
Oh yeah, so the kind of fact that I like was she talks about like relearning her native language and stuff, and how hard she's finding it and how frustrating. And she realizes that to actually speak, of course, requires verbs. And here is where my kindergarten proficiency at naming things leaves off. English is a noun-based language, somehow appropriate to a culture who is obsessed with things. The burns, Robin.
Yes.
Only 30% of English words are verbs, but in Potawatomi, maybe. Apologies if not. That proportion is 70%, which means that 70% of the words that have to be conjugated, 70% have different tenses and cases to be mastered. So
wow.
30% versus 70, I'm like, frick. And it is a failure of language, I think, as well. Like how we talk about things and how we call it saving the planet or like the climate change versus climate crisis, that it's all, I think language can help or hinder us depending.
Yeah, we've done a remarkable job of spinning the web tighter and tighter around ourselves while trying to get out of it.
Yes.
It's a very remarkable performance we've put on that, you know, I think she does a great job of sort of illustrating how these things can be remedied, because as she sort of talks about later in the book, about how like natural disasters and pollution are being kind of remediated by collective actions between people and natural things, plants and the environment in general. She talked about the three sisters. Did you see that section?
Yeah.
A fantastic example of like there is nature in its beauty without humans, and it operates in its own perfect harmony. And then there's humans, which is like a ultimately disastrous variable that usually just destroys everything. But there is a way for us to kind of merge and create this sort of new dynamic. And so what the three sisters is corn, beans, and squash that are all planted in the same mound of soil. And I'm explaining for you, not for Leena.
That's cool.
The corn stalk grows first, and it sprouts up and starts growing really quickly. And then shortly after that, the bean grows, but the bean needs something to latch onto. It needs some sort of supportive stalk, and so it crawls up the corn. But it doesn't crawl up fast enough to stop or hinder the growth of the corn itself, so the corn still has its full maturity. The beans are able to wrap up beside it, and then we have the squash, which is the third sister, which crawls out along the ground and shades the soil and retains moisture, but also fixes nitrogen as well. So the three of them sort of like dance and live together in this symbiotic relationship. And I'm like, yay, nature!
Yes. Yeah.
Way to go.
It's incredible that we think it's more efficient to separate all of the seeds and then harvest them all separately. Well, I'm like, we literally already have the most efficient thing possible. Like, why? What?
Yeah.
Classic humans making problems that aren't there. My one of my other questions is, would you recommend this book to people? And if you would you recommend it to specific people at specific points in their climate change journey? Or whatever that is? Or would it be like a universal, like, everybody should read this right now? Because I think both are complementary answers to the book. Both both are nice things to say.
I like those disclaimers because I don't think that every climate change book is for everyone. I would say that on the spectrum of like doom and gloom, this is definitely a little below middle in terms of fear mongering. It is very frank and honest about the challenges. It is very depressing in the way that she can illustrate how brutally we have mangled some of the natural areas that we occupy. But she does a really great job of illustrating that this is not the way that it needs to be and that there are other ways of going about this. I would say I would recommend this to someone who is well aware of the situation but is rather exhausted by the facts and figures. This is a great book for somebody who's kind of done but needs a different perspective, because I think, especially for me as a student who went to university to study climate change and talk about why this is important, the Indigenous perspective is incredibly positive. If you talk to elders, if you read this book, you really hear something that you don't hear in a lot of climate conversations, which is love and appreciation. There's so much positivity that comes through for her and I would imagine her community when they talk about this subject matter, that it can be really uplifting and it makes you feel positive for a change. And not in like we can do this if we just invent a new windmill that somehow floats above the stratosphere. It's like for once Elon Musk isn't solving the problem, and that's great. Because it feels more human and it feels more day to day. And so middle of the road climate journey, probably a nice little boost in the middle there.
Give you a little lift. What you're saying reminds me of, I've just rewatched WALL-E. Have you seen that film?
Yeah.
Well, I hadn't seen it since it came out, which was probably like 10 years ago. And the whole concept is, I'd forgotten, we fuck up planet Earth. So we go on a spaceship and we stay there for 700 years until the world regenerates, and then we come back down. And I was literally thinking, like, did Elon Musk watch WALL-E and take it as fact? Like, was he like, honestly, great idea, I'm going to run with it?
It now we're like, you know what? if we can live 700 years, it might not be a bad idea.
I could lose 700 years.
We already know how to mess it up when we come back. Like, perfect.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, I think I'd agree. I think it's for somebody it's for somebody who's like the climate crisis isn't news to them, because I think this would be a rude awakening that might scare you off. But I think it's really important. And also just if you like nature writing and you like imagining that you live in the countryside and like the visceral descriptions of it, like people who are really into that, I think that like would really, really enjoy it. And also like that if people have read too many white men books with graphs, then I think you're right. It's a good respite. It's like, I still want to carry on this motorway, but I'm going to need to like change my tactic. Then I think it's perfect to like complete that kind of education. Final thoughts. Do you have anything that you feel like you're going to step away from this book and like do anything, or do you think there's any key learnings that will stick with you, you're going to change the way you think, or is that something that will only come later, months in the future? We won't know.
It has sadly, it has really made me question where I want to live.
Okay.
Because what she talks about is so grounded in nature, and I think that there's a great appreciation that you can have when you live in an apartment like I do, many feet off the ground, with trees in the distance. But this sort of makes you wonder if there isn't a separation happening that makes it difficult to ever truly appreciate and value the natural world in the way that we kind of need to. Because how do you respect and appreciate the water that you get every day if you don't see the spring that it comes from, or witness the tragedy of a logging block near where you live, to truly respect and appreciate the trees that are in your area? Because when you live in the city, it's like, right, nature, that
I've heard about it.
Yeah, I drive 40 minutes to go and walk around in the woods and go, oh, isn't it so lovely? It's maybe buying a house out in the middle of the forest and living in a commune is what I took away from this book.
I mean, that's a pretty big life change. That's a good.
It would be,
and you should get a quote on the front being like, Levi Hildebrand made me move to the woods. Like, that would be the quote.
Seriously.
It's good. Because you've been viewing lots and stuff, haven't you? Like.
Oh my God.
It might be happening.
I don't know. How do you find it? Because in Canada, a big chunk of people actually live in the woods, like, because we have a lot of woods, and that's a luxury that we have. But in the UK, like, most people, I would say, live in urban areas.
Yes, it's rather crowded here, I have to say. Well, just compared to the landmass. But yeah, I think it made me think actually that I don't live on occupied land or like stolen land in inverted commas, although we guess we all do at some point. And also Britain's like number one evil guy for going and stealing everybody else's land. Do you know what I mean? It's not like I live on a place that's guiltless. But it's interesting as somebody who doesn't live on quote unquote Indigenous land, and I guess she talks about how everybody is Indigenous somewhere, and I guess this is my Indigenous land. And when I think about the stuff that she's talking about with her plants, I'm like, that's very interesting, Robin, but I don't have that kind of climate or those plants. So I'm not sure how valuable it is for me to read about these ones over the ones that are actually in my soil and in my climate, which is incredibly moist and rainy and grey. So it made me think about, like, I didn't really learn that much about the Celtic Britons, the Briton, which it's like the kind of people that lived here from like the Iron Age onwards. And I wonder, like, when she was describing the huts that her indigenous people lived on, they sounded exactly like Saxon or Celtic huts, like circular ones that, mimic bushes and like all of that. I was like, I feel like a lot of indigenous cultures learnt from nature, and that's why so much of it is actually very, very recognizable and similar depending on where you are in the world. So I thought that was really interesting, and I actually don't know anything about being a druid and like the like kind of like indigenous wisdom of my own land. So maybe I should do some more homework.
Whoa,
that's what it made me think.
That is wild.
So I'm becoming a druid and you're moving to the woods.
End of story. That is it.
Robin, you've done your work.
Wow. Our YouTube channels are going in a very different direction.
I know. Well, mine needed sprucing up anyway, so I think this is the time to pivot. But thank you so much, Levi, for chatting to me about this bloody brilliant book. So if you haven't watched Levi's channel, it is right here. You should click on it right now and watch. It's incredible, and you'll learn lots and lots of stuff. And we all like learning, don't we? You don't even have to pick up a book to learn. Next episode, we are going to be reading this book with this person, because I will have planned it by then. You can see it on screen. Time travel.
Amazing.
And if you want to watch any more videos in the series, you can see those here. Thank you so much for watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Frog Snog out.